This is Rob Kilmer. California has a budget crisis on its hands right now, and this is a great thing for America. That's what we're talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. That's area code 607. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect, and for my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topics up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. I am no longer going to be promising the lineup for the Sunday talk shows because I can't find them on Saturday mornings as I used to be able to. In fact, it was through the Associated Press. So I will not be posting the lineup for the Sunday talk shows on Saturdays anymore. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com. And my show is uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays. You can listen to it from there if you missed it live. Finally, there is a new debate suggestions section on my website. It is at the top of the home page. You can leave me your thoughts on topics, debaters, and questions. You will also need, and I'm probably going to mention this again during the show, to attend the filming of the pilot next Sunday at Waters Theater at SUNY at 3 p.m., you will need to register. You cannot just leave comments about it or comments on the blog or visit the site. You have to register in order to attend. And that's because I have to notify Binghamton in advance of how many people will be attending. Okay, this week's topic is California. And what I've got a fair amount to read here, and it chronicles the last month or so of California's budget crisis. And the reason that I think it's a great thing for America is because it has to be resolved, and it will be resolved. No more theory here. This isn't about what would be best. I mean, that's what you hear during elections. Well, if you elect me, you're going to get this. My approach to the economy is lowering taxes. My approach to the economy is spending in order to create jobs. The purpose of the government is to provide this service or that service. It's all theory. And we find out a lot of times that people don't adhere to their own theories once they're elected. They don't have that option in California right now. They're going to resolve that problem now, one way or another. And it's vicious and it's bitter and it's ugly and great. But it's going to happen. It's going to get resolved. And I think America is going to learn a lot from it. Californians are going to feel some pain. Americans are going to feel some pain as our fiscal house as our fiscal ship is righted, so to speak. And I think that that's one of the reasons that the Obama administration is not helping California right now. I think they are watching California go through this. They're going to learn from it, and we are going to see that there comes a time, and I don't think Americans are used to this. There comes a time when promises won't solve problems, when theories won't solve problems, when actions are needed to solve problems. Now is that time. And it's happening in California, and it is excruciating in California, and it has to be. California is right now, fiscally, the product of years of fiscal mismanagement. There's not one thing that's occurring in California right now that could correctly be characterized as a surprise, as not predictable. And now they got to sort it out. And what I have done is taken the articles from the San Francisco Sentinel. Just from June 3rd, I've taken articles chronicling how this crisis is building to where it is literally today. And I'm going to go through some of them, and then after this we'll talk about what it's going to take to solve California's problems. Not that anybody on this show, not that I or anybody calling in is going to have the answer, but the more important thing to me is that the process is underway, and it's going to have a finish line. That's all there is to it. And this country needs that. This country needs to understand that things have to be resolved. You know, there's that old saying, when all is said and done, there's usually more said than done. That's not the case here. It's going to get done. And the premise behind this show is that all we ever get is rhetoric. But when the people leave office, we're stuck with the problems. This is a unique opportunity for America to witness the solving of problems, the pain that comes along with them, in order to, I hope, brace themselves for what they're going to have to do in their own states and as a nation, and to take the steps to avoid the problems that California has right now in the future. So here goes, June 3rd, and again, these are all articles, these are excerpts from articles from the San Francisco Sentinel. June 3rd, 2009. Our wallet is empty, Governor Schwarzenegger says in rare legislative address. The Republican governor asked lawmakers to use the state's $24.3 billion deficit as a chance to, quote, blow up the boxes, end quote, of state government and challenge public employee unions, dominant themes during his first 2 years in office. Schwarzenegger requested a joint session of the legislature after proposing the harshest budget cuts of his governorship. He recommended last month that the state eliminate welfare to work, Cal grants, and Healthy Families Health Insurance for Children, as well as close 220 state parks and allow districts to end the school year 7 days early. It's an awful feeling, but we have no choice, he said. Our wallet is empty, our bank is closed, our credit is dried up. Schwarzenegger said the state's dire situation provides lawmakers the political opportunity to consolidate more than a dozen state boards and commissions, which would save only $50 million but is popular with voters. Schwarzenegger also asked lawmakers to privatize prisons and some schools to save money, moves that would invite direct confrontation with the state's most powerful unions. All of these proposals I've talked about for years, and yet they never get done, Schwarzenegger said. Now we're in a crisis, and we are running out of excuses, and we have run out of time. Schwarzenegger already faces criticism for his proposed cuts to virtually every sector of state government. Residents who rely on public services from AIDS medications to dialysis have testified in the Capitol, sometimes tearfully, about the impacts the cuts would have. Unions have held protests daily outside the building, including those representing state workers who stand to lose another 5% of their pay on top of the 9.2% reduction they took in February. The governor asked lawmakers Tuesday to consider having private firms run state prisons. He cited the state's $49,000 per prisoner cost compared to the national average of $32,000. The governor also said that the state should allow school districts to cut costs by eliminating union maintenance workers in favor of private contractors. Quote, firing school custodians isn't exactly the way to fix the budget mess, quote, said Marty Hittleman, president of the California Federation of Teachers. The way to do it is to initiate some revenues, some progressive taxes that tax those who can best afford to help us create the society they grew up in and flourished under. But it's kind of a cheap shot to go after those low-paid workers in our schools to balance the budget. Assembly Speaker Karen Bass and Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg said Tuesday they are prepared to move quickly on cutting $15 billion of the $24.3 billion state deficit, but they prefer a surgical approach rather than wiping out welfare to work and healthy families altogether. They did not say how they would eliminate the remainder of the deficit, suggesting that they would seek revenue in talks with Republican leaders and Schwarzenegger. But Assembly Republican leader Sam Blakesley and Senate Republican leader Dennis Hollingsworth said they remain opposed to any more taxes or even the borrowing Schwarzenegger has proposed. Okay, that was from June 3rd. The lines were starting to be drawn, and they are typical. The Republican governor wants to cut services. The Democrats say raise taxes. Fine. That's June 3rd. As of June 3rd, number of problems solved, 0. But people are lining up in their traditional ways. Again, another article from June 3rd, and believe me, the articles I had were 28, 29 pages long, and I've cut this down to much, much fewer than that. These are, again, excerpts from these articles, but from the same paper. June 3rd, 2009, a second article. California Budget Committee votes to eliminate agencies altogether. A legislative budget committee voted unanimously Wednesday to eliminate state agencies altogether, taking dead aim at an administrative layer of governmental bureaucracy that oversees most of the state's departments. Excuse me, that should have been gubernatorial bureaucracy that oversees most of the state's departments. The 10-member panel, 6 Democrats, 4 Republicans, also voted to eliminate the Office of the Secretary of Education, which lawmakers said is unnecessary because the state already has an elected superintendent of public instruction and a state board of education. It sounds like what we're talking about here is changing the shape of government, said Assemblyman Bob Blumenfeld, Democrat. Government should be a pyramid, but it appears to have become more of a rectangular structure. And a lot of times in this kind of budget, we always end up cutting people at the bottom. And this is saying, no, we need to cut people at the top and get rid of the agencies and make it more of a pyramid structure. From the governor came this. Every year, the governor tries to eliminate and consolidate a number of boards, commissions, and departments. And every year, the legislature rejects that. We're thrilled the legislature is joining the governor's call to make government more efficient and cost-effective, and we look forward to debating with the legislature in the coming days which proposals make the most sense. However, the governor's office said the governor would not support the eliminating of the Secretary of Education unless the legislature gives the governor more authority over state education policy. The state superintendent of public instruction currently oversees the Department of Education. Okay, so now on the same day, the legislature said, fine, we'll cut some agencies. We'll cut the ones that the governor likes. Fine. So you're already moving in the right direction. But you still have this. What's missing so far is whether this amounts to $24.3 billion and whether the total solution includes raising taxes or cutting services. Now, anybody who's heard me on this show before knows that that's a ridiculous way to present it. You should be considering both. June 10th, 2009. This is the last one I'll read in this segment. California near budget meltdown as revenues tumble. California's government risks a financial meltdown within 50 days in light of its weakening May revenues unless Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and lawmakers quickly plug a $24.3 billion budget gap, the state's comptroller said on Wednesday. Underscoring the severity of California's cash crisis, Comptroller John Chang, who has previously warned the state's government risks running out of cash without a budget deal, said revenues in May fell by $1.14 billion from a year earlier. Additionally, the revenues of the government of the most populous U.S. state fell short of estimates in Schwarzenegger's budget plan by $827 million, Chang said. He warned California's state government is speeding towards a financial disaster unless officials act urgently to balance the books. Without immediate solutions from the governor and the legislature, we are less than 50 days away from a meltdown of state government. Schwarzenegger, a Republican, has proposed filling the state's budget gap with spending cuts and borrowing from local governments by scrapping some state programs, including its welfare program. Democrats who control the legislature are crafting a rival budget plan that includes spending cuts and saves programs Schwarzenegger has proposed eliminating. They instead would use reserves estimated in his budget to narrow the budget gap. So from June 3rd to June 10th, no progress, more posturing, and the economy, or I should say the budget, for the government of the state of California is hurtling towards a cliff with no resolution in sight. Now this, as I said before, I think this is, I guess, the new phrase that's been invented for these types of situations is teachable moment. And that's what this is, because this is going to get resolved. It has to be. And when we get back, I will read to you what progress has been made, or not, since June 10th. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. We left off talking about the progress that California had not made as of June 10th, 2009, towards closing its $24.3 billion budget gap. All right, this article is from June 17th, a week later than the last article I read you. And again, all articles are from the San Francisco Sentinel. Democrats vow to pass California Share the Pain budget. Democratic legislative leaders vowed today that the legislature will pass a Share the Pain budget balancing plan early next week, with or without tax increases that will close the state's spending deficit without completely shredding California's social services safety net. The vows by Senate President Darrell Steinberg and Assembly Speaker Karen Bass came about an hour after Governor Schwarzenegger said he wouldn't sign a plan that was balanced with tax increases. The rhetorical staking out of ground by the key figures in the current version of the state's ongoing fiscal melodrama came a day after the legislature's Joint Budget Conference Committee, on a party-line vote, adopted a plan that included $2 billion in new oil production and cigarette taxes to help bridge a $24 billion budget gap. The key differences are that the governor's plans cut much more deeply into health and social service programs for the poor, elderly, and disabled, while the Democratic legislature's plan would replace some of the cuts with revenues from tax increases. The people of California and the legislature have to ask a question, said Steinberg. Is it more important to not look at increasing the tax on tobacco products versus eliminating 900,000 kids from health care rolls? We're not willing to do that. But the idea is anathema to Schwarzenegger, who met privately with Bass and Steinberg earlier in the day. The governor reminded reporters at a gathering outside his office that the state budget adopted last February for the fiscal year that starts July 1st included more than $12 billion in major tax increases, what he called the largest in state history. To now, 4 months later, come out with another tax increase is irresponsible, the Republican governor said. If the governor sticks to his insistence that the plan contain a $4.5 billion reserve, the money lost from a failure to pass the tax increases could be made up by borrowing $2 billion from cities and counties. The borrowing idea, which was ratified by voters in 2004, is bitterly opposed by local governments. It was part of the governor's original proposal, but was unanimously rejected by the conference committee. The plan must consist of permanent solutions to the state's fiscal problems, not one-time revenue that sparks ongoing spending commitments, Schwarzenegger said. Okay. That is from June 17th. The next article I have, which I will read after the break, is from June 25th. I can sum up the progress made during this time this way. Nothing. $24 billion needed to be resolved by the first week in July. Nothing. And you have the traditional battle lines being drawn. Republicans are saying cut the social programs. Democrats are saying increase revenue. Revenue means taxes. I mean, I don't know why we continue to use that euphemism. Revenue means taxes. Who's right? Who's wrong? I don't know. What I don't hear is much in the way of compromise so far. Now, the next thing that you're going to hear about after the break is these IOUs that the state of California is now issuing instead of checks to its vendors and others, because there's no money. And not having money helps you solve budget problems. California will resolve this. There's no question about it, because they have to. But the question is how. And the beauty of this is that no more theory. This problem is not happening in the abstract. This is a right here, right now problem that has to be resolved and will be resolved. And some people say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste and all that, but this is a crisis. It's going to come to a conclusion one way or another, and then we're going to see what happens. We'll be back. We're going to take a break at 8:30 or so. Listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. We left off talking about California's budget problems. They persist. This is an article from the San Francisco Sentinel, June 27, 2009. California budget remained stalled over the weekend. Again, June 27th. First article I started reading to you from was June 3rd. Democratic leaders left Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's office Saturday without a deal to close the state's $24.3 billion budget gap, increasing the likelihood that the cash-strapped state will begin issuing IOUs next week. Schwarzenegger pitched money-saving proposals to change pension benefits and the way the state delivers Health and Human Service programs during an hour-long closed-door meeting with Democratic leaders. Democrats say such policy changes should not be tangled up in the budget. Assembly Speaker Karen Bass and Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg offered few details about the talks after their meeting, but left the impression neither side had budged. The state is slated to start issuing $3 billion in IOUs on Thursday to vendors, students, and low-income seniors and disabled people because it will not have enough cash on hand to meet its payment obligations. Democrats and Republicans are at odds over how to close California's budget gap. Democrats refuse to cut safety net programs for the poor. Republicans oppose more taxes. On Saturday, the governor suggested changing pension benefit formulas for new state hires and other cost-cutting moves as a way to keep the programs that Democrats want to protect. Republican governor has proposed filling the shortfall by cutting $16 billion in programs, borrowing $2 billion from local governments, taking $6 billion from other government accounts, accelerating personal and corporate income tax collections, and cutting state employee pay by another 5%. Democrats have countered with $11 billion in spending cuts and $2 billion in higher taxes on oil drilling and tobacco. Their plan also relies on filling the hole with $5 billion in fees and accelerated revenue through earlier collection of personal and corporate income taxes and $5 billion in other solutions. In other words, no closer, as of June 27th, to resolving what is a problem that has been building for years. Now, I'm going to read to you from June 30th, 2009. California to issue IOUs. With the state poised to issue billions in IOUs in lieu of cash this week, California's budget crisis could create serious headaches for some private vendors and local governments. The deciding factor could be California's banks. If they're willing to honor the registered warrants, which is another word for IOUs, then the problem becomes manageable for the scores of small businesses and local governments that rely on dollars flowing from Sacramento. They'll be able to cash the IOUs. But if the banks resist, billions in state payments will be effectively delayed, putting renewed stress on state and regions already suffering from a deep recession. One Rockland company, a temp firm that relies heavily on state business, has already laid off workers in anticipation of the cash squeeze. So far, no banks have committed to honoring the IOUs. She said Haley Jordan, a spokeswoman for the state controller, John Chiang. She said banks are probably waiting to see how much interest the state will pay on the IOUs, a figure that won't be decided until Thursday, the same day Chiang is scheduled to issue IOUs. The notes will total $3.36 billion, with about $500 million targeted for the private sector. So what does that mean? Now we're talking about not just issuing IOUs, but the banks aren't just going to honor them, as an act of charity. You have to pay interest on them. Interest on IOUs. Could this become any more irresponsible on the part of California? I don't think so. But I would like to hear what Frank has to say. Frank, you there?
Good morning, Mr. Kilmer.
Morning, Frank. How are you?
Good. Hey, it's good to hear you live and not a best-of show like a lot of the other talk show hosts.
I thought every show of mine was a best-of show.
Well, that may be debatable. I even got my aunt listening to you, and she says, I really like that guy. He never gets mad at anybody. I said, well, maybe we'll put that to the test sometime this year.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hey, I, too, would like to see a pragmatic solution to California's financial crisis. But here is the kicker. I have heard that Barney Frank, the banking committee co-chair, if you want to call him that, is right now preparing legislation for Obama to bail out California.
Obama's not going to do it.
Well, we will see. I was wondering, what your opinion would be about that.
My opinion is Obama's going to watch this unfold, and he's going to learn from it, and he's going to watch California suffer through this process in order to educate himself on how to do it. The beauty of being Arnold Schwarzenegger right now is that he's not running again. None of these changes are going to affect him, and he's not going to budge on this. He is not going to, what I mentioned in the last article, these $5 billion, let's see, I just had it. The Democrats' proposal to resolve this includes these one-time gimmick-type things, which we do in New York all the time. Accelerated payments. They want $5 billion in other solutions, $5 billion in fees, and accelerated revenue through earlier collection. None of that does anything to solve the problem. Collecting money earlier does not, do anything to that underlying expense that you're taking the money in for. Schwarzenegger isn't going to do it.
I sure hope you're right that there will not be a bailout, but I'm certainly not as certain as you are about that. And I keep hearing different stories about California being bankrupt. I mean, first it was supposed to be the end of June. Then I heard 2 weeks from now. Now it's the end of July. And then I think the number you gave was even beyond that. So I don't know. This thing keeps going out and out and out and out. But I sure hope you're right. I hope there is no bailout of California. I want to see them make the tough decisions.
I do, too.
And New York is right behind.
New York is, and, this thing with New York, what people don't realize is that when we have a situation like we have in New York, where we don't have certain bills passed, and where particularly with respect to school districts, this has happened in prior years. People don't realize the impact that putting off these decisions, not getting a budget done by April 1st has. The school districts, they still have to have the money, so they borrow the money in the meantime, trying to guess at what the state's going to give them. But they borrow the money short term. That's the highest interest rate they could possibly pay, and that gets passed on to the taxpayers in their school taxes. But I don't think that Obama is going to help California. I think you have what used to be the world's 6th biggest economy, California, and that's a pretty good instructional guide for you if you're the President of the United States.
Well, if you're
watching them solve their own problems and making them make the hard choices.
Well, if you're wrong about Obama, I'm going to call and put it to you.
I'll be stunned if you don't.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks for calling in. Okay. Speaking of that, I will go to the next one. July 1st, California lawmakers fail balanced budget deadline, clearing way to suspend state payments. California's lawmakers failed to agree on a balanced budget by the start of its new fiscal year on Wednesday morning, clearing the way to suspend payments owed to states' vendors and local agencies, who instead will get IOU notes promising payment. The notes will mark the first time in 17 years the most populous U.S. state government will have to resort to the unusual and dramatic measure. The interest rate, by the way, for these IOUs is 3.75%. I don't know how that's compounded. That's a lot of money. Another article, again from the same newspaper, July 1st, 2009. California declares fiscal emergency over budget. Emergency? Did they not see this coming? Not just for years, but since June 3rd? Okay, that part was mine, obviously. California declares fiscal emergency over budget. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger declared a fiscal emergency on Wednesday, forcing lawmakers to tackle a budget gap that has raised the prospect of drastic measures to keep the state working. Lawmakers debated late into the night Tuesday, but could not agree on a plan to balance California's budget, which is now increased to a deficit of $26.3 billion in time for the new fiscal year, which began on Wednesday. The most populous U.S. state now risks further cuts to its credit ratings, which would increase its borrowing costs when coffers are already stretched to a breaking point. Republican lawmakers and Schwarzenegger have ruled out tax increases. They want deep spending cuts to balance the budget. Democrats say that would slash the state's safety net for the needy to the bone. The White House said it was keeping a close eye on California's woes, but it did not hold out an offer of help. Meanwhile, California's lack of a budget may trigger action by Wall Street credit rating agencies, which have warned that they may lower the state's rating further. I'm going to interrupt this article just to say what that means is when your state's rating is lowered, banks charge a higher rate to loan you money. That's simple, which means higher costs to the state to pay it back. Last week, a credit agency downgraded California's general obligation debt by one notch to A-, which is just 4 notches above the speculative junk status, making it the lowest rating of any state in America. All right, here's the last article I'm going to read to you, which is from July 2nd, 2009. California budget deal said possible within a week. IOU interest rate 3.75%. Top California lawmakers raised hope on Thursday that an elusive budget deal could be at hand as officials began issuing billions of dollars of IOUs to avoid a cash crisis on the second day of a new fiscal year without an agreement to balance the books. California faces a financial stranglehold after lawmakers failed to balance the budget by the start of the state's new fiscal year. on Wednesday, leaving a $26.3 billion deficit and prompting Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger to declare a fiscal emergency. He minced no words on Thursday in lambasting lawmakers for their failure. In the last 4 weeks, instead of negotiating and coming to a budget agreement, they decided to debate and to debate and to have hearings and more debates and more hearings and finger-pointing and assigning blame. At the end of the day, they haven't accomplished a thing. Companies doing business with the state, local agencies, and individuals on financial aid, such as the disabled, elderly, and college students, could be in line for IOUs, raising uncertainty amid already worrisome economic conditions. Okay. I realize for most of this show I have read to you, but I thought, and I don't think I've ever done that, but I thought it was worth it to chronicle just what's been going on since the first week in June in California. And that's just the written word about what's really been going on in California for years. But like all things that you defer, they come due. When we get back, I'm going to go to a quick break here. We'll talk about the benefit to America of this happening for those of us who are paying attention to it, and you can be sure that Washington is. The benefit of watching the excruciating pain and process that California is undergoing right now, and how it better teach us something about balancing the books for the rest of this nation. We'll be back. Okay, welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. I had said at the beginning of the show that this is a good thing, this problem that California is going through. Why is it a good thing? Because something has to give. Schwarzenegger, to his credit, isn't going to let this go until there are fundamental changes. Things like early collection of revenue, that doesn't do anything to address the underlying costs. So you got to either agree to raise the revenues long term, raise taxes, simply collecting them early. First of all, I don't even understand how that can be legal, but that's not going to solve anything. It's not going to solve anything. And I do believe that Obama is not going to help him. I think he's going to let Schwarzenegger show the way. Schwarzenegger is going to teach this nation how to solve a massive problem. I believe that. I'm not a huge fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger, but look what he's done just since June 1st. He's gotten a Democratic legislature to commit so far to somewhere between $16 and $18 billion in spending cuts. And when we talk about them in terms of cuts, there's almost this implication that there's an entitlement to them in the first place. My feeling is if you don't have the money, you can't have them. Period. If something costs money and you don't have it, then you don't get it. They don't have the money. It is amazing to me that in an economy like ours, just looking over the last 20 years, 30 years, let's start with Carter. We've had good times and bad times. We've had recessions, and then we've had recoveries, and recessions and recoveries, recessions and recoveries. That's never factored in. Now we have a recession. To me, this is mathematical, not moral. These problems should be solved with calculators, not billboards. If you don't have the money, you can't buy it. Whether it's police or after-school programs. The thing with a good crisis is that, and we talked about this a little bit last week, somewhat, with respect to the Canadian healthcare system. What we might be able to do, and I don't know, but we might be able to do, is take the Canadian healthcare system and not just identify its problems and therefore reject it, but identify its problems and go about improving it. That's what you do when you have a crisis. We have a healthcare crisis right now. California has an economic crisis. If certain programs are done away with, we're Americans. We will come up with creative ways to meet those needs. We will not do that until we have to. Regrettably, another American trait, something that the World War II generation did not suffer from, but that's how we are. We wait. We wait until things are nearly impossible or impossible, then we act. Well, in California right now, they're impossible. Nationally, they're nearly impossible. So you come up with creative solutions. It's that simple. That's what you have to do. We'll survive. We just can't survive the way we've been surviving because it doesn't work. We know that now. We have all this craziness going on in California without any resolution in sight, but when there is a resolution and programs are cut and services are cut, somebody else will pick up the slack, whether it's private, whether it's religious, whether it's volunteer. These are the types of changes that come from real crises. All right, I'm going to try and get one more call in here. Ron, you there?
Yes, good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Pretty good.
Good. I just want to make a comment quickly, and what I would like to say is show me the money. In California being a border state, what I would like to see or know is the amount of spending that takes place associated with the legal situation. The money they spend on security, welfare, the money that's spent in jail and prisons, a multi-language situation for the schools, and, of course, medical costs. I think that should be published.
Well, I think that's... Thanks for the call. I got to get to one other thing. You know, I think that's obviously part of the problem, although it was oddly absent from all the articles I read. Sure, that's part of the problem. I think that there are... But on the other hand, and we go through this a lot, we also don't know how much money is pumped into the economy by the money that is made by people who are illegals. We also don't know how many are legal and therefore paying into Social Security and things like that. It's a harder issue than it sounds, but I don't think there's any real question that California pays, literally, a cost for illegal immigration or illegal, I don't know if illegal immigration is an oxymoron or not, for illegal citizens using services in California. And that I didn't see much in any of this. Actually, I didn't see a word about that in any of these articles. But that may be because California believes that that's a federal issue. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to change gears here a little bit and reiterate. We're filming the pilot for the You Defend It debate series a week from tomorrow at 3 o'clock at the Waters Theater at Binghamton University. Doors will close at 2:40. Filming will start at 3. I cannot stress this enough. You have to register on the website to attend. You will not be allowed in if your name is not on the list of people who have registered. And the only reason that that's necessary is because I have to tell Binghamton University in advance how many people are coming. It also affects where cameras will be set up. There will be several cameras filming this simultaneously. There will be at least 3 cameras. And depending on where people will be sitting, we will have to arrange for the cameras to be placed in certain places. They can't be near exits, things like that, if certain exits are going to be used. I wish it weren't the case, but it absolutely is the case. You absolutely, positively have to register at www.youdefendit.com. It's $10 to attend. You can either pay through PayPal or pay at the door or whatever, but you've got to be on that list to be let in. And again, the doors will close at 2:40. Okay, that's gonna about do it. Next week, what you may or may not have noticed is that although the topic for the debate is the role of the Supreme Court justice, and we had a pretty major decision this past week, I'm not talking about that on the show up to the debate. It will not be a topic next week. I want you those who attend, to go and hear it fresh, hear it for the first time, and see a debate that we believe is worthy of the issues and worthy of the Americans whose lives are affected by them. The debate will be just exactly as billed.
You there, Roger? Hello?
Hello?
You got me here.
All right, let me figure out what
My name is not Roger. But people will be made, the debaters will be asked questions. They will have to answer them. They will not be allowed to discuss the other person's argument. They will be there to defend their own argument. They will prove to you why they are right, not why the other person is wrong. And I'm going to take that debate everywhere I have to till I get a network to air it permanently. Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to You Defend It, and we will be back next week.